My guest today, Bev Aron, founder of the Deep Dive Coach Institute, joins me today to talk about all things related to the adult, child, and parent relationship, including the dynamics around money. About 5 years ago, I enrolled in a virtual coaching program providing access to a dozen phenomenal coaches, and Bev was one of my favorite coaches to watch in action, skillfully nudging people to look at how their thoughts and feelings might be exacerbating the very real problems they wanted to get coaching on. Fast forward to Bev's busy professional life today. Bev provides exclusive coaching to select high net worth women, either self made or inherited wealth, so that every area of their life is exactly what they want it to be. Her specialty is relentlessly seeing her clients in their unlimited potential. Welcome, Bev.
Thank you, Jean. Thanks for what you said, and so fun to be here.
Well, it's very fun to have you. So I really enjoy the Friday emails and the videos that I receive from you each week. And I especially like the way you often push back on generally accepted views on things. And recently I've noticed you've done some very interesting ones on emotional eating. And I think many of us are familiar with the familiar trope of, emotional eating is all bad. And, I like the way that, and this is just an example of how you push back on things, but I like the way you said in a recent email that you sent out that, sometimes Netflix and ice cream is exactly what the situation might call for. So,
Right.
I think that's probably part of your approach. Can you say a little bit more about, original thinking when it comes to familiar ways that people think we should do things?
Yes. The way that I love to see it is there's two topics or facts of a situation. And because of the culture we belong to or influential teachers in a community we belong to, they get linked. And then we start to all agree that they're linked, and sometimes that linkage causes us pain. For an example, let's have a money example.
Hmm.
I have many very, very wealthy clients who could spend a lot of money on whatever they want and it wouldn't make a dent in their financial situation. But they will come to me, they'll go, I spent too much money, or I went on a shopping spree because I was bored and it's a bad thing. Because we have this linkage between, don't do retail therapy, it's bad, or overconsumption. But the truth is, what I like to do is separate it out. What's the impact of the
Right.
thing you're doing on what's the result in your life? If the impact is you had some fun, you bought some beautiful new purses, you may use them, you may give them to somebody, and you're financially secure still, then I don't see that as a problem that you want to work on. Let's work on the real problems in your life where you're not creating an experience that you want that is impacting your bottom line, not necessarily financially, but emotionally or relationship wise.
That's just so interesting. There's just countless generally accepted views that we have, such as, oh, we shouldn't be, taking our emotions out on the ice cream or on the shopping or on the credit card. And while, of course, those general statements might be the case if someone is really challenged with obesity and wants to reduce their body weight, or if they are, as a recent guest on my podcast mentioned, are struggling to budget for a home. Absolutely, but they're generally accepted views that maybe don't apply to everyone. So I like that. I like that fresh thinking and really, forcing might be the wrong word, but really asking your clients to look at their beliefs on it sounds like really everything.
Yeah, exactly. And we always, because we only have so much mental energy every
Right.
day, we sort of have this bucket. So we want to put our mental energy to what's really going to make a difference and up level our lives and improve our experience of it.
Exactly. So that brings us, or can bring us nicely to parenting adult children. And I'll begin by saying that Andrew and I have four adult children, two from each marriage, and we speak so often about how lucky we are. They're independent. They're really terrific individuals, and we enjoy our time with them very much. But in observing parenting in the world, observing issues that get brought to my psychotherapy practice, issues that I read about in my estate planning interest, I
Mhm.
sometimes have the feeling that there are a lot of generally accepted views when it comes to parenting adult children. for example, it does seem to be pretty well accepted that if a child is really struggling with something, that, the appropriate thing to do is to, as quickly as possible, provide a solution or provide at least 4 or 5, quote, helpful ideas for them to fix their problem. Thoughts on that?
Yes. I have 4 adult children also.
Terrific.
We It's just the most fun in the world. For anyone who's listening whose kids are young and it's chaos, the adult children are generally the reward. Would you agree, Jean?
Yo, yes, that's so true. I really like this stage actually more than the toddler stage.
Yes, I know. So fun. So I think the thing is that at some point as parents, we have to shift from seeing them as children. Whatever worked when they were children and when they were struggling, it really was our responsibility to identify the struggle if they couldn't, or if, other professionals did, and then try to find a way to solve it if we agreed that it was a problem. And with adults, we have to recognize that the sort of shift of power is not the right word, but maybe like authority,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of equalizes it. But even if they are dependent on us financially or practically, they are adults. And so I think if we consider what the most important thing is, which is relationship and connection.
Yes.
There is this idea from Steve Porges, who's polyvagal expert's theory that's coming up about the nervous system, very popular now, that our prime directive as humans is connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so as parents of adult children, adult children have more of a choice than our young children. Our young children are completely dependent on us. They have to live in our home. So they realize quickly, most of them, that it's in their best interests to adopt our beliefs and adopt our definitions of success or struggle. Adult children, obviously, we want them to be thinking for themselves, and they are. And so as parents, if our prime directive is connection with them, then I think it makes it easier for us to know and decide how much we're going to sort of barge in or offer, or how much we're going to love and nurture and surround and allow.
Right.
I'll share a tiny tip that I learned from a book called Raise Your Kids Without Raising Your Voice. It's for younger kids.
Mm-hmm.
And she offers this tip, which is just very beautiful because it's very practical, which is, the 80-20 rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
The parental. So she brings it to parenting. She says, for every 10 times you interact with your child, only 2 out of the 10, so 20%, can be correction or instruction. Once you've done those, 8 more have to be chatting, loving, praising, whatever.
Right.
She says, until they're teenagers. And I'm thinking, oh, well, then it's 60-40 because teenagers, She goes 90-10.
Ah.
Because if the minute you lose the relationship,
Right.
then you have nothing to work with. And so I think if we extend that to adult children, if you want to make 5 suggestions, as you said,
Right.
you need to make sure that whatever 9 times 5 is, 45 of your interactions of those 50 are loving, encouraging, neutral.
Right.
So the person stays with you.
Right. It's interesting. Even on the 4 or 5 suggestions, it's there, and there's no one right way to be a parent of adult children. But
Yeah.
I would say that, when I think about my growing up and my parents, they often would say, when I was in my 20s and I was practicing law at the time, we don't have any idea what Jeannie does at work. Like, she's way, past us, or, something like that. And when I look back on that time, my parents didn't have an opinion on, the man I married, whether I should take this job or that job at a law firm. Like, I was out on my own, and I would have been very surprised had they offered, an opinion. And so when I reflect on that, more often than not bite my tongue in terms of giving really any advice. But again, we would love to know your thoughts. There's such an array. A person can give 4 or 5 and then, 50 positive suggestions as you've said, or go down the path of saying these are adults and I'm not going to give them any advice.
Well, what do you give them instead of advice?
Great question. When we love to have Sunday dinner or some meal over the weekend with our children and they come over, and I'm always just so very curious about their work lives and careers because Andrew and I both, well, we love work. And so, tell me about what's going on. Tell me about, like, did your manager get back to you on that question? Like, did you do that presentation? And more, I kind of see my role as kind of a cheerleader.
Yes. So you're giving them curiosity, you're giving them attention, you're giving them the best view of themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
It means relationship. And that means if they need you, they'll come to you. They know to come to you.
Right. Right. And yeah, I think that's true. Then they come and then you have the opportunity to offer them advice.
Yeah, it's ideal. I do the same with my kids. What I
Yeah.
find is if I offer them my opinion, it's pretty much disregarded. And so I realized very quickly they kind of
Right.
showed that point where they became adults and wanted to think for themselves. And so I take on the same thing, as much cheerleading, as much
Yeah.
positivity, much, availability. And that's it. And then if they come to me and ask me, I mostly really only won't even give them my opinion then because I don't know what's best for them. I truly believe I don't know what's best for them. And I just
Right.
enable me to offer them the opinion that they know and be a sounding board for them.
Yes. Yes. It's sort of, Bev, like a relationship with really any adult in our life. I think we all know how well it goes over for ourselves unsolicited advice, right?
Mhm.
We really value friends that listen, commiserate, and only offer their thoughts if and when asked. And I think it goes. I try to remind myself that always with the adult children that the first and foremost is the word adult, and
Brilliant.
and and
Yes.
then their children. But if let's move to relationships with children that is often present and is or sometimes present, and that is where there is financial relationship. I think you touched on it earlier. Perhaps the when a child lives with the parents, doesn't pay rent, or is there's a whole host of scenarios. Talk to me about how that dynamic might or might not change the relationship.
So the coaching approach that we use suggests that facts don't create relationships or feelings or results. So the fact that they aren't bringing any money, or the fact that they're living, in the home and they're not contributing financially,
Mhm.
none of that will change the dynamic until the parents have some thoughts about it.
Mhm.
Because the parents come with all of their own biases and thoughts, unexamined thoughts that they inherited from their parents and their culture, and
Mhm.
they will, create their role in the dynamic. So, for example, I'm Jewish. Most Jewish parents, kids can stay forever. We generally don't sell our big homes. There's, space to come in. Obviously, we want our children to be launched and independent and thriving, but it's not a problem. Whereas I have so many clients and colleagues that, kids are 18, they sell, they move into a small place, kids need to be independent. And so I'm not saying one's better or worse. I'm just saying,
Right.
so for me, a child living at home and not contributing might not bring up what it would bring up for somebody else.
Right.
So it's just good to be aware of what we bring, and it's not always so easy to know it without talking to somebody who can help you see. The problem isn't that your child's at home and not contributing. The problem is what you think about it. And
Right.
and to point out our generally accepted cultural things, when you were introducing that you have 4 adult children, you said they're all independent.
Yes.
And it was like we all went, oh, success.
Right.
So, which we just all agree it is and it's fantastic until one of our child isn't independent, our adult children, and then we
Right.
really need to examine what's the dynamic. So I think the most important thing about it is the techniques that you used with your child living at home as a child, be careful about using them as an adult. I have clients who've been, advised by experts, professional experts, to set very clear boundaries, make very clear consequences. And with one client, it led to her child choosing to move into a homeless shelter. It's a very wealthy family, rather than stay at home. And again, what you think about that will determine how you feel about it. For me personally, I found it quite tragic. But there are people who might go, good, let them go see what it's like there and let them see, and then they'll come home. And as long as we remember our prime directive is connection, we want to stay connected to our children, then we recognize this is very complex. It's difficult. As adults, we don't really always have good skills of sort of negotiation and collaboration, especially when there's emotion involved. And so we just don't want to simplify it and say it's as simple as saying, if you don't clean up the kitchen, then I'm not going to give you money for Uber or whatever. It's just not as simple. I don't know that it was ever as simple, even when they were children. But as adults, I think we want to recognize this is complex. This is challenging. I love this person. My main thing I want to maintain is the relationship. So I'm going to navigate. It's just going to be this very careful, challenging navigation with them.
Right. Yeah, it's just fascinating. Again, it goes back to what I like about the way that you overall coach, and that is pushing back at simple solutions.
Yes. I would love
Because,
like 1, 2, 3, 4, but
yeah, it reminds me of the podcast which I recently did with Felice Kirsch, who is an estate litigator, and the topic there was, of course, estate litigation, and she mentioned people that come and see her shortly, 2 weeks after someone has died, with concerns about the possibility of litigation, and there's signs that the family is not happy, and I made the comment that, well, since and she confirmed that unhappiness usually doesn't just arise right at death. Usually it means that there's been unhappiness or conflict in the family for years before the death. So I made a comment which I thought, again, was just one of those like common things of like, well, it would be helpful then in the years leading up to death and will planning to communicate. And I was really glad when Felice, gently pushed back on that and said, yes, that is something that you hear a lot. I think she used the word trend. But on the other hand, she said, there is a school of thought that a will is a private document, and what people choose to do with their wealth is private and is up to them. Certainly the law has certain restrictions. It's not a complete free for all what one can do in their will. And it just really gave me pause that, yeah, like maybe for some people, they just want it to be private. And maybe for some people, it sounds like some cultures, they want their children to live with them as long as possible without a financial negotiation there. So I really like that open-mindedness that you're suggesting.
yes, so interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. So, in terms of this, I know that one thing that is often mentioned is that we have a relationship not only with others we care about, but also with ourselves. So it strikes me as in, reflecting on what works for us. Say if a child is living with us or would like to have money for a wedding or, some sort of financial thing, that one of the relationships we want to check in on is the one with ourselves and with our spouse, and what
Yeah.
feels right about giving the money or lending the money or having the child live with their home, as well as checking in on how they might feel about things. Is that, can you say a little bit about that, about our relationship with ourselves and what feels right, as well as what our children might be best for our children?
Yes, I love this question. So, our relationship with ourselves is basically a collection of all the thoughts that are running through our head all the time. And the term that we use for this is self witness. we're just witnessing ourselves all the time. And how we are witnessing ourselves creates how we feel. So the ideal is we have a resonant self-witness. So we have a self-witness that interprets everything we do and everything that's going on in a way that it's not like pretty, 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 but it's just always resonates with ourselves. That was aligned. That's who I want to be. That was not exactly who I want to be. So let's figure it out. Unfortunately, most of us have a critical self-witness. It's because of the way we were raised and, the education system. So we're just constantly, there's this background witnessing. We're not aware of it most of the time. We just think we're thinking about what's going on, but there's a sort of background loop that's going on, that's interpreting what we do, that's judging us and evaluating us, and that impacts how we're feeling. So then you come to me, let's say you're my child, and you say, I want to move in, I'm getting a divorce, I want to move in with my two children. And we think we're responding to that. But we're really responding to this relationship with ourselves. You're a terrible parent. If you parented better, this would have never happened. You shouldn't have done that thing when they were 4. Your friends are going to think you're a failure. And that's it, so that's sort of the undercurrent. And the more we can become aware of this relationship we have with ourselves, the more consciously we can respond to what comes to us in the form of our children or other.
Right.
And that's the work of a lifetime. The beautiful thing is that we can change our self-witness. We know that our brains are flexible and malleable, and including these thoughts that are very deeply ingrained. There is lots of evidence that with work of becoming more aware, we can change it. Even just being aware of it helps, because then we can have strategies like, whenever I feel afraid, I don't respond. Or like I have one, I don't make decisions based on urgency, because if I'm feeling urgent, it means I'm having thoughts that definitely don't serve me and aren't aligned with my greatest, most potential self.
Right. Right. That leads me to thinking about communication. And once we've done the work of thinking about the relationship we have with ourselves and how that connects to the relationship we have and want to have with our adult children, inevitably there are conversations that we want to have. And the more I spend time, or the years go by with adult children, the more I realize how important it is to really be, I don't want to use the word careful, but to think about the way that I phrase things so that they don't harken back to when the children were small. In other words, that they are with the same respectful, curious, to use an earlier word we used, interested tone that I would use with any other adult.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on communicating with adult children? And perhaps communication is always easy when it's all joyful and happy and everybody's celebrating a birthday. But so perhaps when there might be something on the table that requires a good discussion.
Yeah, it's
Talk
really,
about some of the communication skills that you think are important.
yeah, it's really tough, Jean. You're right, because we bring ourselves to the table.
Right.
For example, coaching somebody who's having an adult child, I'm so good at telling them what to say to their adult child and how to negotiate it so beautifully.
Oh, yeah, right.
In fact, as I'm saying it, I always say to them, listen, I'm terrible at this with my children. Like, it sounds so lovely, because I'm not bringing anything. I have no emotion, about
Sure.
that. So we have our emotions. They're coming from it. So, the main thing we want to be aware of is, what am I feeling? And why? And is this the time to have the conversation? If it's not a feeling that is open and curious and collaborative, then, the best thing to do is really delay. Take a pause, delay, because you're never going to create an amazing outcome if you're coming from fear or desperation or anger or judgment.
Right.
Maybe just one thing I can offer that's sort of a little tip is, we tend to, when our children are young, this is a family therapy idea. I'm sure you know about it, Jean. We tend to assign labels to our children. The
Hmm.
typical ones are hero or the mascot or the scapegoat. And what I find is I'm constantly having to remind myself now that they're adults. I don't think it's useful when they're children, but I didn't know when they were children that this was a thing. And the problem with assigning the labels is that what we tend to do is we seek evidence for what we think. So if I think, for example, my oldest child is the hero and the youngest the mascot,
Hmm.
always going to be looking for those mascot like tendencies, or I'm only going to notice the perfect things that my hero child does, the scapegoat. And then because we're hooked with our children emotionally, then they will start to act it out. So as adults, we want to be really aware, what labels have I put on my child that I am responding to them that way? So my younger child, who was like our mascot, which worked beautifully when she was young, she was cute, she was everyone's toy. Now she's an adult, and
Yeah.
it stops me taking her seriously as I do to the hero child. So
Mm.
if we can be aware, just write down name of child, what are the qualities that I just assume are theirs, set, and then know as set as I think they are, that I'm responding to those qualities in the communication rather than the person in front of me who may have moved away from those or may want to.
Right. That's really terrific, and it's raising the point of reflection and planning ahead. And in that regard, something that I find really helpful is speaking with Andrew in advance of a conversation that I might be wanting to have with an adult child. We recently were in Calgary visiting our son that lives there, and there was a topic we wanted to address with him. We were there for 3 nights. We talked about it. The first night we decided, well, it's just the first night, so we won't talk about it tonight. And then the next day, it's like there was some other reason why we delayed it. And the long story short, by chatting each day, we realized that we just didn't need to talk about this topic at all, but just enjoy our time with Tom and not raise it. My point being that sometimes not everything needs to be discussed, and having
Yes.
someone, a trusted person, ideally one spouse, um, sure can help that, and sometimes just make the conversation go away. Because how many times have we had a conversation with a friend or an adult child, and we just thought, "Why the heck did I have that conversation? Wasn't really anything of value of me raising that."
No, and the impact on the relationship was not positive. I love that you did that. It's so intentional and so aware every day, checking in. And then having it resolved is brilliant. And I think a spouse is amazing. My husband is also is good because he's just much calmer than me, which is such a help. Also, an advisor like Eugene, when it comes to money, is a fantastic sort of guide to have the conversations with, or a coach if you're not aware. It's very, it's bringing up a lot of fear, and I don't know why. So somebody sort of outside of the relationship also is very useful to help talk it through and figure out the resolutions that either you have it or you don't have it. Either way, very clear on what your purpose is and why you're going in.
Right. So as we've chatted about, Bev, and as you know, the most of the listeners of the podcast are wealth advisors in one way or another, perhaps lawyers, accountants, investment managers, you name it. Those are the majority of our listeners. And so something that I would love to chat about is in, the thousands of people that you've coached, and particularly in the high net worth or ultra high net worth area, what are some of the pain points that are brought to you about money and wealth management and between the generations?
Mm. Yes, interesting, because I do coach some parents the parents that I'm coaching are self-made, so they've made their own money,
Sure.
in one generation. But I do actually have a number of clients who are also children who were born into a lot of money,
Great.
and
So you've seen in both sides, really.
both sides. So the interesting thing is that money, as we said, it's just a fact, it's just a topic.
Yep.
And it's a topic that seems to bring a lot of emotion, a lot of fear. I coach every side on, a lot of fear around money that it will all go away, or that it will create problems, often in the younger generation. Now, there's lots of children who have relationship, problems with their parents and their siblings, but it does seem very common to me that the whole money and succession and who's going to manage it and who's going to be on the board and what position on the board does lead to a lot of fractured relationships, not only in the family of origin, but also extended family.
Right.
Um, you know, so even though it's neutral, it seems to be, for whatever reason. I think when there is a lot of money, it's often front and center in the family, and what's being done with it, and how people are living, and who's getting what. And so I think advisors are very useful. I think finding out for the parents, what are the money beliefs that I have, that I inherited maybe, or I heard? What did I pass on to my children? What am I passing on to my children? And mostly, what is most important to me?
Mm-hmm.
Is the money the most important? Is it most important that my children steward the money the way I want them to, or use the money the way that I want them to, and therefore that will be my focus? Or is my relationship with my children primary? Because then I may have to loosen the reins a little bit on the money aspect of it.
Right.
That's one thing that I find. The other thing that I find often comes up is sometimes they're just the parents, the holders of the money, need to be very honest about their children. I don't know if you found this, Jean, but often in a family, one child sort of emerges as the obvious person to steward the money. They just have those smarts and skills, not for any reason. That's what they were born with. That's their interest,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And so, the most fair isn't always sort of equal, and parents seem very hesitant to call that out. So where we might easily say, this person has a very outgoing personality, and so this might be the best profession for them, but parents seem very tentative to say, this child is the obvious one to manage the money, and just straight up take the leadership in that way. And then that leads to a lot of confusion and sibling relationship issues.
Right. Yeah. There's a couple things there I would love to explore. On the first point about uh, families that do have a lot of money and they're torn between whether their children have the same views on money and stewarding the money as they did, or on the relationship itself. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the very outset of our conversation about what is most important. Is it the relationship, or is it other things?
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the Harvard study, which was started in the 30s and is now into the third generation, where the Harvard directors interviewed families. They started as young men, and now, as they say, third generations. And the long and the short of it is that the number one driver of success or happiness and health in life is relationships, social connections and relationships, bar none, more than health, more than money, all those sorts of things. So it just, is a reminder that in the midst of a lot of wealth, I guess, since in this podcast we can give advice, even though we don't in our professional lives, it really is a good reminder for people, and maybe wealth advisors could give this gentle advice that let's remember the relationships, let's remember the social connections, because really through our life that is what is going to be making us happy, rather than getting all twisted in a knot as to whether the kids view wealth in the same way as we do.
Yes, 100%. And then when the relationship is solid, then we have more ability to impact
Yes,
you know,
isn't yeah,
course.
so
Yeah,
true.
yeah. It's
Model
such,
it.
I love that study because I think many people would have said, money or financial situation. And,
Hmm.
having a lot of money is amazing and it buys us lots of things. But yeah, it doesn't buy us happiness. It doesn't buy, I mean, I guess it can buy relationships, but it can't buy us true connection. Also, it can't buy us wisdom. So,
Right.
you can be wealthy, but not have the wisdom to know how to be in the world and how to be with your children. But the beautiful thing is that money can buy you access to gaining the skills for relationships. And, it can buy you services and mentors and guides, which is an amazing way to use the money you have to create probably the result that everybody wants, which is well-functioning children, you know, being responsible with all they're given and connected to each other.
Right. Yes. Megan Tong, a coach that was on an episode a few episodes ago, made the point that, um, or excuse me, it was Megan Jansen who's a psychotherapist, and she said, sometimes people think, oh, I don't need to go and see a therapist, but they don't think twice about going to a gym, um, and to get fit, whereas seeing a therapist or a coach for personal growth, for mental health, that can sometimes be something that, oh, well, I wouldn't want to spend money on that, or I don't believe in that. But in fact, probably the key to relationships, which is really the topic we have at hand today, is doing our own work, is doing our own personal development so that we can really show up in relationships in the best way possible. The other point you mentioned, and it's a little bit, shall I say, less touchy feely than what we've just discussed, and that is you made the point that sometimes in a family there is a real leader amongst the siblings, and that people might be
Mhm.
reluctant to name that him or her as the executor, or as the attorney under the power of attorney. And that is a real conundrum in estate planning. And I'm so glad you raised it because typically estate administration or the administration of attorneyship does go a lot better if there's just one person. Not one
Inter-
person being a dictator, not one person, absolutely not just acting in their benefit, nothing like that. But you're absolutely right when you say that parents sometimes look at the number of children they have. Oh, I have 4 children. Therefore, I need 4 executors named because, oh, I love them all equally. And
Yep.
it's really one of the biggest mistakes when it comes to estate administration and from what I heard you say, perhaps stewardship during life, whether that's the head of a foundation that the family sets up or a board of directors.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you mentioned that point.
Yeah. 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 And interesting that you say it actually is best with one person. So it's a matter of how to navigate that.
Right.
Because loving you all equally could mean, and therefore I'm appointing Joseph as the executor because I love you all equally.
Right.
Because in my wisdom and with what I've learned and the advice I've received, this is going to be the most successful way for you all to move forward in well and healthily and living the life that you want.
Yes.
Secrecy, I think, also is very dangerous. Secrecy around the money and who's getting what and how it's working. Because I don't know if you find this, Jean, but they always know. The kids know and they're watching and you might think that it's all going to work out, but it's sort of secrecy kind of it sinks in. It erodes relationships. So if we want to keep it secret because we don't know how to raise it or we don't have the confidence to raise it, then that's really a sign. I have some thoughts about money, about my children, about relationships that are going to erode the relationship. And if I have money, I have the ability, as you said, to go and purchase a service that will help me figure it out so that I can
Right.
come with everybody. And then it's not eroding my relationship because the person who receives the money secrecy or receives, more secretly, it erodes their relationship also with you and with their siblings. It's not like that person's okay and everybody else is suffering. everybody suffers when there's this sort of family secret around money that everybody knows about.
Right. Yeah. Oh, it's an excellent point. Secrecy, and as you say, partial secrecy. So
Yeah.
secrecy overall, and not wanting to have conversations about, say the named executor. And maybe to Felice's point the other day, maybe a couple or an individual with wealth doesn't want to have share everything,
Yeah.
but in terms of roles in the administration or overall major divisions, I lean towards communication as opposed to not, because it there is a fine line between choosing to be private and having secrecy that, as you say so aptly, frankly erodes family relationships, and particularly if some things are shared with some children and not with others.
I love that you made the distinction between private and secret, because to our point that our thoughts, create our feelings. I mean, if I think, how does private, this is mine, that feels so solid, as
Yes.
opposed to secret, this is a secret, don't tell. That feels very ungrounded and anxious. And so, we
Right.
want to be clear, which one is it, by how it feels to us.
Right. There's another aspect of privacy and secrecy that I feel is important in parenting children, and that is not, how shall I put it, not complaining about one of them to the others, or not seeking advice from one about the other. Now, none of us are perfect, and I think all of us as parents of adult children, it's easy to fall into that. But
Mm,
I really believe that there are much better advisors, both those whom we pay and those whom are friends,
yes.
to speak through our concerns about our children or other concerns in life without burdening our kids with that.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I totally agree with you. That is a very common coaching that comes to me, of conversations that the child feels very uncomfortable about other children, and or conversations among children. Often one child will be very upset with the parents, or have something very long standing about the parents, and then they share it with the siblings, and then the siblings get all riled up. I think the best advice on this is, I don't have a conversation with anybody in the family about anybody in the family. I established
Yeah,
that. I came to live in Canada, just my brother was here. Then my parents came and my sister, and we were all just very, very close, very close
sure.
to each other. And so when they came, I was anxious, and I just made this rule: I don't talk to anybody about anybody else in the family. And every time I break it, I always regret it. And so it just
Yeah,
clarifies things. I love you all, and I'll talk to you about you and me, and
right.
talk to Eden about me and Eden, and you two can talk about me. You can talk about each other. You can talk about me if you want to. You can go and do whatever you want, but for the person that we're talking to just be very, very solid and clean. And then all they're dealing with is their thoughts about who they're talking to. They're not kind of being impacted by unwelcome, intruding thoughts from other people. It's
Right.
brilliant advice. And thank you for reminding me. You brought up a
Well,
situation where I'm actually asking my one daughter about advice about the other. So thank you, Jean. I am going
well,
to.
I'm so glad I brought it up, because I want to ask about that rule, in air quotes, that you made for your family when you were all in Canada. I'm guessing that over time they came to know that that's just Bev's way. Just as you might like chocolate and you don't like caramel, they know that there's no point in trying to have a good old gossip with you. Is that
Yes,
fair?
that's exactly right. And somebody would say, how's so and so doing? And I'd be, I don't know. I think they're okay. I would just kind of cut it short
Right.
every, and it just worked well. And when I broke it, it was generally somebody coming to me with a complaint. And so then I would always regret it, because then I'd be upset with the person they're complaining about, when in fact I had nothing going on with them. It would impact how I was with them.
Right. Right. Exactly. Um, Oh my gosh, I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. We've touched on so many different topics. Our At the beginning we were to talk about adult children and parents and their relationship to money and wealth. Um,
Yes.
I can't wait to hear our conversation later because I know we've covered a lot more than that. But is there anything about that topic or anything else, Bev, that you were hoping we talk about today that we didn't get to?
I mean, I love our conversation. We went to so many places. Maybe the one thing that we can offer for listeners who have young children
Hmm.
is your relationship with your children now. You have It's so wonderful to be listening to this now because you now have the ability to use all this wisdom and establish the relationship with the children now where you are always their cheerleader. And when my idea about this is they're born how they're born, and they're already programmed to become who they're going to become. And so if we can observe and possibly put aside our biases of what makes a respectable or successful adult and see this precious person inside of us and just sort of support them on their way to who they're becoming, then as adults, all of this will be so much easier.
Yeah, that that's really excellent, and I certainly hope that there are parents of small children that are hearing that wonderful advice. You know, in those years, you're just so darn busy, right? And you're just trying to keep them from falling down the stairs. And then, you know, then when they're adult, you wish that you'd actually taken the time to teach them how to cook or, done some of the things that you've just mentioned. But I love that saying. I was saying this to Andrew the other day. When your children are young, the days are long, but the years are short. And you don't really realize how true that is until, you know, suddenly they're taller than you and they're patting you on your head.
Right? And you're begging them for some time, and they're like, sorry,
Yeah,
I'm busy.
no. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
busy, mom. Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bev. It's really been a real pleasure. Bye
Thank
for now.
you. Thank you for having me.
See you.